Hey there, I'm Pete Townsend, and this is Money Never Sleeps. We look inside the minds of entrepreneurs and at the crossover of startups, enterprise, finance, technology, and life as we know it. On the show this week is Connor Murphy, the CEO of Bridge. I met Connor at a Techstars event in Dublin in 2019 as he was just getting his latest venture off the ground in Bridge. And I started using the Bridge app within seconds of meeting him to help me bridge my network. Connor Murphy is an all-around good guy. And in every conversation I have with him, I end up connecting way more dots than I ever could have expected in generally what is a 30-minute conversation. Connor has a background in computer science, startups, venture capital, and management consulting. He was previously the managing director of the Techstars SAP.io program in Berlin, and he has invested in 30 pre-seed technology ventures that have an enterprise value greater than $1 billion. The undercurrent for all of this was Connor's founding of DataHug back in 2009, a collaborative forecasting and pipeline management solution that he sold to Callidus Cloud, now owned by SAP, back in 2013. In this episode, Connor and I riff on his DataHug founder experience, his experience with investing through Techstars, and now his role as CEO of Bridge, and how all of these experiences are linked by the common threads of building relationships, trust as a currency, and kicking your network into hyperdrive. We also talk through some of his time-tested lessons learned from his time as a startup founder and investor that helped to inform his path and that of the founders he's invested in. All right here on Money Never Sleeps. But listen, so just looking at some of the history here between us, Connor, was September 2019. I look back and saw when it was that we met. And it was in Dublin at Huckletree. And it was a Techstars event where Chris Adelsbach was in Dublin. He was helping with a handover to Kartik Varma, or KV, as we know him. Shout out to KV. And to Chris, obviously, as well. And Martin Cass was hanging out, and Daniel Loftus from Urban Fox was there. And I was talking to Chris, and he showed me Bridge, your app.
Oh, wow.
And then he called you over, and I was hooked. That was, for me, quite a seminal moment because I love making intros, and that was quite a unique way to do it, and it was really helpful. So that was the first point. And then, obviously, when I jumped in to lead the Techstars Web3 Accelerator, that you were one of the first people I spoke with. And what did you do during that call? Do you remember?
Made some bridges?
You did about 12. I went back and counted. You fired off 12 bridge intros for me. So I want to dig into this, and that, you really helped me get going with intros to mentors, investors, other interesting people when I jumped in. So it would be great to have you probably just walk us through a little bit of your backstory in whistle-stop tour fashion from your DataHug experience, your time at Techstars, now Bridge, and just bring us up to speed a bit with your story.
Yeah, awesome to be reminded of that. And like the thing with intros is they're usually things that people do and forget about and are invisible. But actually, for me, it's the glue that builds all of our networks. So like if I actually go back and I ask people, like engineers in particular can be very skeptical about networks and connections, and they can see it as something that's kind of like sleazy. They picture someone at a networking event with business cards, maybe a salesperson doing this and handing them out the whole time. But actually, I asked them to think, well, how did you meet your wife? How did you meet your co-founder? How did you meet your friends? How did you meet? And it's usually, there's a network component to a lot of those answers. Yep. Do you know what I mean? And it's this hidden hand, they talk about the hidden hand of the economy, but the hidden hand of your whole life is actually these networks and these serendipitous moments and these connections. And for me, I think, growing up in Ireland, I just remember like earliest memories being in my granny's house, and they're on my mom, and they're all visiting, and they're always chatting. Do you know Chris Adelsbach? Yeah, I remember Chris. He's married to Susan, and it's just this Irish like natural ancestry.com of how everyone knows everyone and where they are and all that kind of stuff, and it just seemed quite normal to me. And then when I started my career, my background's in computer science. I remember going over, I arrived in London and I joined a big management consultancy firm there. And I just presumed everyone knew everyone as well, like, you know what I mean? And you'd be asking in English, be like, what are you talking about? And actually, when you asked those questions, those connections were there. And then I moved to the US and I started the exact same thing. I'd be like, oh, where are you from, Virginia? I'd be like, oh, go Cavaliers. And they'd be like, how do you know that? And I'd be like, I just know one random fact. And just chatting to them, like, where do you go? Do you know Tyler and blah, blah, blah. And they're like, how the heck? Yes, I do. How do I know it? And for me, I've always seen the world as this really small, interconnected thing, even there are 7 or 8 billion of us. And I've always had this curiosity to figure out those connections between people, because I find when I meet someone early on, like we met through Chris, instantly I trust Chris and you trust Chris. And that gets transferred to two of us. And straight away, if Chris just says, you're a good guy and I'm a good guy, because we both trust Chris, it shortcuts probably 3, 6 months, years of relationships and qualification. And we just straight away have a connection. And I'm like, yeah, I'll do 12 intros for you in the next meeting, because you're already vetted and by someone in my network. So trust is actually the currency of relationships. And the easiest way to leverage that trust is to tap into a trusted network and someone usually in between who's vetted and connected you. So that's how I've always seen it. And then when I started applying that to my day job, there was no technology that kind of mapped to how I saw the world. And how I think the world really works is connections one-on-one. It's not like, in sales, we'd always be looking at, and I started my career in management consulting and then going through the ranks and then going towards partner. And you start going these journeys where you want to sell something and you have to develop a client. And I'm like, okay, how do I get into Pfizer? And then it's not Pfizer. How do I find a Chris Adelsbach at Pfizer? How do I find a Martin Cass at Pfizer? And it's actually people to people. And, so it was trying to find that. And then I got into the world of CRMs, and I saw that we had all these CRMs, we had all these different spreadsheets, and they're all fragmented all over the world. I had thousands of colleagues all over the world doing amazing stuff. But nowhere could I find out who in my network knew that person at Pfizer. Checked LinkedIn, checked other solutions. But what I also realized is that this is kind of how DataHug was born, was, well, actually nonstop. I looked around and every single person in the office was on email, or at the time BlackBerry or whatever else, and they're always communicating, they're always on calls, they're always in calendar, they're always meeting people. So the data for our network was actually all sitting there. So the insight with DataHug was, and we'd hug your data, was that we would look at all the communications within a company and instantly see who everyone in the company is communicating with, not looking at what you wrote down, because equally when I saw the data in a CRM, it would never write down Chris Adelsbach is a dick. And he isn't, he's awesome, but you'd never write down that. You'd say like, Chris is an opportunity worth $100,000, blah, blah, blah. But you'd also never say like, never mention Martin Cass when you're talking to him because they hate each other. That stuff never gets written down. And also the more senior people in unstructured sales environment, let's say partners at KPMG, at Deloitte, all these places, they never write down the notes anyway. So they've got all these they spend all their time building relationships, all the time communicating and answering, jumping on calls, having meetings, interacting, but never recording it or writing it down. And it's all this unstructured data. So DataHug came along, analyzed all the emails, the phone calls, the calendars, not to look at what we're talking about, because we think that's a lot of BS and you're all like being polite and everything else. It's just who interacting with who. So I could see who at Pfizer not only knows Chris Adelsbach, but actually it looks like Martin has had 96 emails with him over the last 2 years and 14 calendar meetings and 17 hours of phone calls. So that would become a relationship score, which would then be like, wow, who will I call first? Because maybe 17 colleagues know Chris. I'd go to Martin straight away. Or I'd go to Susan. She might have a very low relationship score, but she actually has something in the calendar with him 3 weeks from now. So she's got some recency bias as well. So it just helped me triangulate really fast. No one in the organization had to change anything they were doing. And it would just mine all this. And it would fix the biggest problem in CRM, which is you buy this shiny new car, you spend a few $1 million on Salesforce. Everyone's excited. There's a big rollout. 3 months later, there's no data in it. It's crickets. So it's a car without fuel. But the fuel is sitting here inside all his emails, calendars, and everything. That was the insight, and that's what we built, and that was DataHug. And then DataHug was, to the day, a 7-year journey. When we sold it, it's now part of SAP, and it powers a lot of their CRM. We raised money from Salesforce and a few others, and there was a whole first-time founder journey there. Made a lot of mistakes, possibly every mistake you could possibly do. But we still managed to get to an exit and build something of value, despite all of the things we did wrong. That kind of helped me, as I said to founders, I can kind of help you get to Series A, and how to avoid all of the mistakes I made is probably what I would do as a mentor, rather than knowing how to get Series B, Series C, and beyond. And that's what attracted me to Techstars. When I moved to Berlin, I started mentoring there. I became an EIR there, became a managing director there, and then became a venture partner there, where I was actually coaching other MDs as well, which I absolutely love because that gave me more scale as well. But again, the energy and the idea around DataHug we'd unlocked a part of it for companies. But then the idea for Bridge was, and it sounds like we started with something smaller with intros, and I can talk about why we started with intros. It's the same vision that this network exists and there's a better LinkedIn out there, and it should be built on relationships and relationship scores, and that it should be more peer-to-peer, because relationships don't care that Chris is at Pfizer, because Chris moves. The relationships with Chris. So I want to share with Chris, Chris can share with me, and we can collaborate no matter where we are in the world. And particularly as everything's accelerated with remote working and you being in Dublin, me now being in Switzerland, people moving around, moving companies, that's just increasing more and more. How can I see my network and access my network in a way when I browse the web? So we talk about building Google for people, where Google has indexed the world's information. We want to index and organize the world's relationships and bring the two of them together and ultimately add a whole new layer to the internet. So when you're browsing a website, you can see all the information that Google's given you and the website's given you, but you can see all the information from your network that they know about that website or that person. So you can tap into that. The same way if I'm looking at a restaurant or I'm looking at something on Amazon, I read the reviews. If I'm on that website, I can see Chris knows someone there, and I haven't spoken to Chris in 5 years. It's a great excuse to reach out to Chris. Like, hey, Chris, I'm looking at this tax accountant. You seem to have a lot of connections to them. Are you a customer? Do you recommend them? And I actually did that example last week with someone, Alex Tang, who I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. And he told me, I love this accountancy firm. They're brilliant. Here's how much I paid him. Let me introduce you to the CEO. And I instantly saved myself hours in terms of research. So it wasn't even an intro. He saved me hours in terms of research and who my tax accountant should be, and saved me thousands of dollars as well. And instantly, like the way Chris gave us trust when we first met, when I contacted them, I was like, I don't need a sales pitch. I just sign me the order number because someone I know who uses you vouched for you. And I just want to buy your product right now. So it shortened their sales cycle as well. And it also shortened my research cycle and saved me $3,000. And I have a new tax accountant. And I can get back to doing what I love doing, which is not tax.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I love it. It's a great product. And starting with that intro, and the going back to that Huckletree night, and then the 12 intros you fired off for me. I mean, I use it pretty much every day now at this stage, in that where I've got, even when I could just send an email, I'm like, no. I want to put this through Bridge so that I can keep track of all of my intros on Bridge. When someone sends me a forwardable email and says, can you introduce me to someone? I put that into Bridge and I just do it through Bridge.
Yeah.
Right. And so I use it in a couple of different ways. One, just when I need to do this double opt-in intro, and intros, like you said, this trust is currency, that where some people don't understand that they say, well, can you just introduce me to so-and-so? And I'm like, well, I've got to ask them first because they don't know who you are. And I need to make sure that they do want to talk to you. And this is especially true when it comes to introducing founders to investors, right? You know this.
Yeah. And you're not, I actually, intro is even the wrong word. I've realized you're vouching for that person as well, which is massive. It's a vouch is what you're doing, You
are. You absolutely are. And so I use it that way to do this double opt-in where I say, hey, listen, here's so-and-so. They would like to talk to you. I know them. I invested in them. And I think they're pretty good for this reason. Would you like an intro? And they have the right to say yes or no.
Yep.
And hopefully they say yes. And that will automatically connect the person who's asked me for the introduction to the person who will be getting that. So that's a really helpful way to do it. Also with people that I have a significant degree of trust with, that where I can just fire off the cold ones almost sometimes.
Yeah.
And say, hey, just want to connect the two of you. We talked about this separately offline that would be helpful for the two of you to know each other. So please go nuts, and go ahead. And then the best thing about it is that I get that little bit of feedback because there's that 2 week later feedback loop that automatically pings the people who I introduced that says, how was this intro for you? And I get that feedback. And Chris Adelsbach was talking about this last year with us when he visited in Techstars when we were in London for the week with the Web3 cohort. And he said, those are all data points for him in seeing how the information comes back, because when you're investing at an early stage, the only data points you really have are based around people for the most part. And you get that information and it's a way to gather that information. So it's a really, really useful tool for me.
That's awesome.
I know you've told this story before in my presence, but I wanted to dig in a bit in that you realized that there was something missing, right? Like you just said a couple of minutes ago. Was that eating away at you in terms of your own professional, your day-to-day life? Because moving from the DataHug, exiting that, fantastic, jumping into Techstars, doing that for a number of years, and then going to build Bridge. Was there something that was happening to you during the Techstars experience where like, there just has to be an easier way to do this? Or was it just so well formed from your time at DataHug that this was something you were eventually going to do after DataHug, that it was always just lurking in the background?
Yeah, and I think going back to like the DataHug experience, like that was unfinished business. I suppose that's probably the starting point. So like someone talks about people being serial entrepreneurs, blah blah blah, and like, oh, it's your second startup. I'm like, well, I'm not. I'm a singular entrepreneur. I have the exact same idea, but I'm just, the definition of insanity is trying the same thing and expecting a different outcome. So I'm going to go down the insane route here. So it's like starting a startup is hard. A lot of people want to do startups. And for me, I'm probably like, there's the missionary or the mercenary kind of approach. And I'm probably a missionary in this one. This just feels like it has to exist and it should be done better. The second part of that is I'm a computer scientist. And that means I naturally think technology should solve a lot of these repetitive processes. And even just that intro flow we talked when we made those 12 intros for you, just that personally, like it's part of my value add. And Techstars became a big part of my value add. I describe our job at Techstars as I'm like an API plugging founders into a new network. Yeah. So typically we might meet these amazing founders who have amazing domain experience. Like lucky one of my founders was he was the CIO of HBO. Like he built streaming technology across the whole world, all that kind of stuff. Others are PhDs in deep plastic regeneration, recycling, all the stuff I'll never be an expert in. But my job was to plug them in, and I think you'd share this as well, Pete. Like our job is to find his mentors, put them around him, plug them in, and we force that function at the start. And then for the next 6-7 years, you're nonstop plugging them into more opportunities and more people as they have problems. So you're basically like this network on-ramp, and that's what Techstars I think does really well. It's like an API into an ecosystem or a vertical. So you either come to Dublin, your program, and you meet like loads of great mentors around there who are founders, investors, angels, but also people in the Web3 community, or in my case was the AI machine learning SAP community in Berlin. So like there's these kind of like flows around the world of energy and connections and networks, and obviously node 0 is San Francisco and all routes kind of lead there eventually. But there's these on-ramps, and and Techstars can be a great on-ramp, and connectors as individuals can be these amazing on-ramps. And I realized that networks, for me, I'm a visual person, are almost like a marketplace. And again, that sounds transactional, and it's not in any way, this is just how I see the graph, how I see the data. There's a demand side, people who want introductions and connections, and there's a supply side. And that's, at some point in your career, some point in your day, you're on the demand side. Early in your career on the demand side, you need to build your network. You want to solve something, you want to sell something, you want to learn something. And then as you kind of are lucky enough to have built a network, you suddenly can see the world, how you can connect people together and be these shortcuts for people. And you can be a connector. And actually, when I started DataHug, I was, late 20s, early 30, I was on the demand side. It's like, how do I build my network? How do I sell? How do I become partner to this firm? How do I get into Pfizer? How do I win these deals? And then as I kind of joined Techstars, probably like almost 10 years later, I've gone through the whole venture washing machine of raising money and meeting all the VCs and learning the world of all these things like cap tables, all of these things that were just alien to normal humans because you're doing your normal day job. And I suddenly had this expertise and this network, and I was a connector. I was on the other side. And that's where we saw this opportunity where everyone attacks the networking side, and I did first with DataHug. But actually, if we attack this niche, small connector side, that became very clear to me towards the end of DataHug, and then it became like every single day when I was at Techstars, I was like an air traffic controller, just like doing the same thing over and over again, and it's the same repetitive process, same flow. And I wanted to get rid of all the admin because just think of that very first phone call we had. If I was to do 12 intros for you and how we suit before, I'd take down a note of 12. I got to make these intros for you afterwards. Oh, yeah. Saturday morning, I wake up, I'm like, gosh, crap, I forgot to do the intros for Pete. I feel bad then, and I feel sick, and then I send them over. Then I have to send them over to you and remind you, because you're like, how do you spell Chris Adelsbach? And you're like, I blast out 12 names. You're like, what did he say? You're trying to take notes. So it was taking me hours as well to do this. And I had the DataHug experience, and I could see, also within DataHug, we're mining like billions of emails and phone calls and calendars, and you'd see these super nodes. And these super nodes just loved, it's like the core value in Techstars, I think, was give first, which also give first, and it was all about the power of the network, which just really aligned with who I was and what I believe in. But you'd see it in KPMG, Deloitte, you'd see it in all these networks. There were these super nodes who were just super connectors. And DataHug could help you find those super connectors, but it couldn't help the super connector be more productive. So actually the bridge view was, well, actually the most valuable people in any network are the connectors. If you can find those connectors, and Malcolm Gladwell talks about it in his book, The Tipping Point. He talks about the mavens, the salesperson, the connectors. If you can find those connectors, you can find those super routers into all these networks, into that on-ramp, into those flows or those networks that you want to get into. So I even learned at Techstars when I was going prospecting, and a big part of Techstars, we spend 9 months a year recruiting, trying to find founders. When I would go to Sofia, or I would go to Madrid, or I would go anywhere prospecting and looking for founders, I wouldn't try and meet founders. I would try and meet the connector in that local ecosystem. I'd try and find the Martin Cast, or you, Pete, or I'd try and find Chris Adelsbach. The Gene Murphy is a great example in Dublin, who's now in New York. You'd find those super connectors who are just give first, who love helping people. And you find one of them and you bring them for lunch and you build a relationship with them, and they will send you deal flow for forever. So if you can tap into these connectors, it's just fantastic. And then, so bridges, let's make them productive. They're also, in my view, the hidden heroes of every network. They're the people who've changed my life, who I worked at Techstars, how I got into DataHug, how I raised money. There's certain people who I keep seeing over and over again who, when I'm not in the room, are thinking with me and dropping me intros and connecting me to other people. And I don't even know this is happening, but it's changed my life like significantly, and I can map that back. So I've seen the power and magic of these connectors. They're hidden heroes. They're spending 5, 10, 15 minutes helping me in the middle of the week, with nothing in it for them. So how can I make them more productive? That's step one. And step two is how can I make them more visible? So when I'm going to Madrid, I can find out who are the super connectors in Madrid. And they're typically not the most remunerated people, let's say in VC. Like, there's a person who can raise money from the LP and write the ultimate check. But that person writes that small 2K check, 5K check, might do 20, 30, 40 intros, which lead to $5 million round. So how can we celebrate them and put them on the map so that actually LPs are coming to them and say, I'll give you money. Let's just say in the venture world, or in sales, I'll actually hire you as my VP of sales, or I'll hire you as an advisor to my company. So how can we help these connectors not just be more efficient, but actually to be more recognized, and for the world to understand better the value they're doing? They are the hidden force of the economy, of the world, of our lives. And how can we actually recognize and celebrate them? And if we can recognize and celebrate them, we can encourage more people as well to be more give first, to connect more people, and then the cycle just gets better and better. And then the final thing in a post-AI world, like, we're going to have more time for coffee, more time for calls. So actually you need to be able to and our network's getting more fragmented. How can we bring all that together in a more natural, holistic way? And we, as humans, love nothing more than doing this and connecting and how are you getting on, how are the kids, like, what any good restaurants I should go to, all those human things. If we can get rid of the admin around that and just focus on the relationship side of things, it just makes us all smarter, richer, wealthier, happier. And there's all the research around that supports that. And I'll pause there because you could tell I could chat for hours about this, but it's such an obvious thing to me. But Techstars helped me see the other side of it, the connector side. And suddenly I could see the whole picture of the networker demand side and the connector supply side. And that allowed me to say, okay, I'm going to attack the market this time through connectors. Because if we own connectors, we own the most trusted people in the networks, and they have the biggest distribution, and we can maybe grow from there.
Well, you've just managed to pass 2 of my tests as a founder, Connor.
Insane, and doesn't shut up.
No. 2 things. 1, deep firsthand experience of the problem you're solving. You've felt the pain. 2, knowing your market inside and out, right? And knowing the like you said, the tipping point. What is it that is going to make this something that will, I'll use the word viral, but something that people just come to depend on. And when it gets to the point where it was, I don't know, a year or 2 ago, you and I were chatting about this, and you're like, Pete, how much would you pay for this if we were to turn on the paywall? And I gave you a number, and it came at a little bit north of that, but I still paid for it. And
I think that's just whatever the number is, add 30% is the advice we give our founders.
Exactly. And because I don't think I could live without it. And what you mentioned a couple of minutes ago was, like you said, that added feature that I didn't mention was that where you're talking on the phone with someone that needs your help, and you can just say, all right, you need an intro to this person, this person, this person, this person, and just fire it off. And there's no risk in that, because you're just sending it to the person who needs the intro. Yeah. And if they don't act on it, and this goes completely with my ethos, is that we need founders to be able to take advantage of the opportunities in front of them. If you've got someone that's willing to provide you with intros to their trusted network, here you go. Here's the first step. Now it's up to you. Now it is up to you to present yourself in a way by writing this little blurb about why you want an intro to this other person. And it just fits so well in with everything. I learn a lot about the founder when I do that as well. So going back to Chris Adelsbach's, he was voted UK Angel of the Year. People who don't know Chris, who's UK Angel of the Year, he's made over 150 angel investments. In my mind, he's Mr. FinTech. He grew a company to a 300 million exit. He ran Techstars FinTech with Barclays. He's an amazing, if you're looking for FinTech angels, go to Chris Adelsbach.
But what Chris also is just so smart. He said when he'd meet the founder in the very first call, so Chris would save time. He likes the founder, but he's not sure. It's the very first call. He's got the first data point. He said he will offer them 3 intros on the call, right? Then he sees how quickly the founders respond to that opportunity he gave them. He sees how much thought they put into the information, like, hey, I just want to meet Pete for coffee. You know, instead of like, hey, Pete, I know you run this amazing blog. I know you're also on the board of Coinbase, you know, all of this kind of stuff and what you do. And I read your article about this. I'd love to chat to you about this. So make it personal, make it more. He can see that. And then he can if they do a good job and he forwards it on to those 3 other people who are probably angel investors as well, he can see, are they excited? Do they accept? Or they hit decline? No conflicts. I've got 3 companies in the space, or I invested here before, it didn't work, whatever else. He gets that data point, and then he gets the feedback after they meet 2 weeks later. And then he finds out they're like, oh, I loved it. I'm going to invest as well. Are you investing? So he gets co-invest. He has build around. But more importantly, in that 30 minutes with that founder, he's given them opportunity. He's also added value. And every VC and every investor is like, oh, we can add value. We got this network, blah, blah, blah. He gets off the call. The founder checks their inbox. There's three intros waiting from them from Chris. Do you know what I mean? It's not like, oh, yeah, let me know how I can be helpful. That famous quote. And then like, yeah, add me on LinkedIn and search my network. Like you're just like, it's like a passive BS answer. It's a nothing burger because, you know, venture, like people in venture want to have an option to invest. Usually they're like, yeah, they want to sound nice. And they're like, yeah, wait till Sequoia's put in 4 million and then I'll put in my 100K beside you. So they never want to fully say no. And they were like, seem helpful and say the right things. Whereas Chris is actually standing out from the crowd because they've got 3 intros standing there. And he's got all these data points coming back in from other investors, and he's winning allocation in the deal. That's the most important thing. He's winning allocation in the deal. The founder loves him. His brand's going to the roof. Even if he doesn't invest, he's helped the founder. So like there's apps, and he's maybe helped those other angel investors as well. Because now Harvard has shown that the best way to maintain relationships, everyone's like, oh, I need to get a CRM and I need to like download all my LinkedIn contacts, put them into a spreadsheet, rank them all, and then say, I'm going to stay in touch with everyone. And you know, that's great. But it's out of date 6 months later because everyone's moved and blah, 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 and all that kind of stuff. Whereas the best way to stay in touch with your network and to build relationships is to ask questions. And not just like, hey, Pete, let's just catch up, haven't spoken in 6 months, where you get these automatic emails from people and you know they've got a little CRM going. Where instead of like, hey, Pete, I met this founder who's in the Web3 space, see below what they wrote if you want an introduction. And that's just, you're like, oh, I haven't heard from Chris in 5 years. Chris is thinking of me, you know what I mean? So you win there as well. And that's, so there's all these social dynamics, which are very nuanced, but actually humans are hyper aware of them, you know? And I think it's just fascinating for me from almost an anthropology, sociology point of view as well. When you talk about an expert in your market, it's actually the feelings and emotions that people have and the dynamics and the tiny calculations that are going in your head. How will I look when I send this to Chris? You know, I haven't spoken to Chris and I don't actually know Chris that well, but this could be a great way to build a relationship with Chris and blah, 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 by providing him value as well, by giving him a nice opportunity you've curated on a plate for Chris to look at, you know?
Yeah, so. I know. And this reminds me of in what I wrote about last week in our newsletter was Danny Meyer, the restaurateur, and his mantra of ABCD, always be connecting the dots. But he says the longer form version of that is always be collecting the dots.
Yeah.
So you can connect the dots. And collecting the dots means experiences, data, thoughts, feelings, memories, people, relationships, all of that. So, and it made me think about everything that I'm doing. I love that API analogy that you mentioned, connecting networks, but it is about collecting dots.
Yeah. You need to have that in your head, a mental model of the dots to connect as well. Yeah.
And Bridge helps me to connect the dots while I collect the dots.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's one of the biggest things for me. And this goes back into my heritage. My mom, she'll probably listen to this and she'll love this because she finds a way to connect everybody to Athol, Massachusetts, which is the town in Massachusetts that she grew up in.
Exactly.
And she finds some way to do it.
Yeah.
And find some way to say, oh, you know this person and I know that person and I know that person. So I think I have a little bit of that in my blood.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but it's
connector blood. I get up to my mom and my granny, and I look at my 7-year-old, she's now 11. She kind of has it too as well. She's standing in the hall of the school, just connecting the dots between people and just seeing the pattern.
Oh, I know. Like I said to my daughter when she started secondary school, I said, listen, you're going to be in this melting pot of kids from all different schools, and but you have your great friends from your primary school. And the best thing to do is try to make new friends, but then connect your old friends with your new friends.
Yeah.
And then your group of friends just gets bigger.
Yeah.
And those relationships grow. And I see her doing that, which is awesome.
And another thing that stuck with me around that, when you talk about the humans are complex in terms of the data, like sort of, birthday, what school you went to, where you're from. I kind of remember the story. I'm terrible with names, by the way. I'm so bad with people's names, but I remember the stories. And I remember the stories are like where they're from. Like I always remember now where you said you're from in Mass. And you remember, people remember things differently. But one thing I remember Paul Hayes speaking about, I think it was a presentation skills. I think it was Paul Hayes said this or someone like that.
Paul Hayes from Beach Hut.
Beach Hut, yeah, he was a brilliant kind of communicator and storyteller and just connector with people. I think it was Paul said it, but I'll give him the credit anyway, because it really stuck with me, was people won't remember what you said. Like, we remember how we met and the 12 intros, I can't remember that, and I can't remember a lot of other things, but you remember forever how they made you feel. And actually, that's what gets imprinted. Oh, Chris seemed like a good guy. Pete seemed like a good guy, or seemed nice, or seemed trustworthy. Or it's like these simple words. So even on demo day for founders, when we coach them how to present and pitch, people won't remember what they said 6 months later. Go, like, oh yeah, that founder I liked that founder, or that resonated with me. I can't remember exactly why. They'll remember the emotional connection, and that actually never has left me, because I remember people like, do you know someone that's like, yeah. Like someone asked me last month, there was a guy at TripAdvisor, Lars Holzman, I think. He set up TripAdvisor's office in Dublin. And I can't remember any conversation we had. I can't remember where we met or anything like that. But I remember having a really good feeling about him. And I actually was able to make that connection as well. And he obviously had that memory about me, because he was like, oh, how are you getting on? I'm back in Boston, blah, blah, blah. And I was able to make that connection. And that was 10 years later. So it's these emotional connections also. And they never get written down as well. But it's just like, who could be the person that has that emotional signal? Do you know what I mean? If you're looking to hire someone, the back channel reference checks and all that. And like we've talked about Bridge and the connection side, but the other part that I love is you can share your network with someone now as well. So the founder can actually be proactively browsing the web. They can hit Sequoia's website or Benchmark's website, like I hit that accountant's website. And Bridge will show you like, hey, Pete's sharing his network with you. He's made those 12 intros and he's sharing his 4,000 connections with you. And he actually knows 6 people at the website you're looking at right now. And that allows the founder then to reach out to me as well. So I can only be on a call with you once a year, let's say, for half an hour. Yeah. But I can be with you 24/7 as you browse the web, and you can see, oh, Connor knows someone there. And you can just ping me then, and it gives us, like, you can ping me a message on WhatsApp, whatever else. Connor, you seem to know Chris Adelsbach. Tell me more. I'm like, I'll be like, thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. Awesome. Like, he's amazing.
You've just reminded me of something. A founder that's coming into our class and that's starting on March 11th asked for an intro to someone at PayPal. And in my mind, I thought of one person initially who wasn't able to help. And so I said, well, you know what? Let's go find someone else. But actually, if I just go into Bridge, I'm going to be connected with someone at PayPal. Yeah. Right. And I will find someone that has a good level of trust, either with me already or through a second degree connection, that will help me to get that done. So I'm going to do that today. But on that point of thinking about this from an investing perspective, like I just am here, are there things that you have learned through building Bridge that you wish you knew when you were running Techstars in Berlin? I'm always thinking about this. The stuff I'm learning now in the last couple of years, I'm applying to the next class. But are there things that you look back and say, oh, if I knew that, this might have happened or that might have happened?
It's almost the other way around. It's almost like the Techstars experience really informed the Bridge experience, and I'm still almost processing it. So, for example, like a Techstars of a company now that's being offered, north of 100 million in an acquisition, and like their breakout client was an introduction that I was able to make back in the day, and I'm like, oh wow. So even within Bridge, we don't show this today, but I know that intro became like $1 million a year customer. So like even just putting like, hey, we made the intro, the feedback, everyone was happy. Be able to put the outcome of that, which I know now later because of Techstars, how could I capture that in Bridge? How could I actually put into Bridge that was a $1 million introduction, or that other introduction was a 10 million Series A, or that introduction was actually a co-founder came from that as well. So they got their first big customer, they got a co-founder, and then other ones came through the mentors. The mentors I know made an introduction to another customer. Do you know what I mean? So how can I start actually putting the value on that and not just saying like, oh, Pete's awesome. Pete added like $96 million worth of value to his portfolio in the last quarter or the last year or the last 2 years. So it's almost like I'm constantly seeing how the network unfolds because you need hindsight to see how it unfolds. And I'm like, how can we add that back into Bridge? So, but I think DataHug informed a lot of my experiences and teachings at Techstars. And then I think Bridge is then trying to implement a lot of those things I shared with founders and I'm trying to do myself. So a few of them were, I can talk about like the tactics that I think are timeless that I taught at Techstars or still share with Techstars founders when I mentor, that I try and apply every day to Bridge. So I'm still processing the ideas and lessons from DataHug and from Techstars into Bridge. And I've probably made enough mistakes in Bridge, but I haven't processed all of them yet, where I would love to, in the future, go back into a Techstars and do a debrief and then almost share that back with the founders. So I'm still processing lessons from DataHug and Techstars and applying them into Bridge, I would say.
Yeah. What were some of those timeless things that you think that going from Techstars, building Bridge, recognizing things happening on a day-to-day basis in Bridge, but what are some of those timeless things that you would look to see in founders, or that you would share with founders on do more of or do less of?
So like the first one that comes to mind, I think is the workshop I might have done, around the 4 steps of the epiphany. But the workshop is called, and it's actually inspired by Jens Lipinski, who's the reason I joined Techstars, along with John Bradford, actually. And I look at the network history of how I met and got in. So I saw Jens, who's he's a brilliant managing director because he's a PhD in biochemistry, and he can just see complex systems and make them really simple and explain stuff really simple. It's his superpower. And I think what Jens runs Angel Invest now, a fund in Berlin, writing 100K checks. But what Jens kind of identified was premature scaling. He saw his companies fail because of premature scaling. When I remember watching his workshop, I was just seeing DataHug through the eyes of that workshop. And I was like, okay, I ultimately failed to achieve the vision because we got a lot of premature scaling wrong. So that's premature scaling, is doing things that you might have learned from bigger companies or you see later stage companies doing and thinking you need to apply that to your company today. And the classic example of that is I'm hiring a VP of sales. When I hear a startup saying I'm hiring a VP of sales, I'm like, wait a second, do you have a salesperson? No. Okay, do you have leads coming the door that you can't handle? No. Okay. Welcome to premature scaling. I did this. You spend 150 grand on hiring, 60 grand on a recruiter, and you do that 2 or 3 times, spend loads of time, and you don't have leads coming in for them. You haven't figured out the sales process yourself. You haven't figured out selling. So that's the first one, premature scaling around, and it's typically doing things too far to the right, and doing them now, and they're expensive, they slow you down. So that's the first, and there's a whole workshop on that, and I have it at my blog, connormurphy.blog, and you can see there's a whole workshop of that if you want a deeper dive into how to avoid premature scaling and killing your startup. Then some very simple tactical things. I meet like founders even before Techstars, and they're like, I want to be a founder, and I got this idea, blah, blah, blah. And I just say, there's this amazing book by Rob Fitzpatrick called The Mom Test. So if you're listening to this and you're exploring an idea, and it's a very short book, takes about 40 minutes to read, but it's a great insight. And it's basically, and this is how I applied this to Bridge. It basically says, when I'm asking you for feedback, Bridge, Pete, I'm like, Pete, I have this idea for Bridge, blah, blah, blah. And you meet people and you tell them I have this idea. And naturally, again, human psychology, anthropology, how we react. I just met you. I don't want to offend you. I'm like, yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, that's really cool, Pete. Yeah, no, you should go there. Keep me updated. Yeah, sure, let me know. Yeah, and founders who get these happy years. Everyone really likes what I'm doing, especially some angel investors. I'm going to quit my job and do it tomorrow. Simple little pivot on how it's positioning rather than pivoting. Keep your idea the same. But when I'm chatting to you, Pete, I say, oh, my friend Chris Adelsbach has this idea. So it's not your idea. You take you out of the equation and you tell the idea and you're like, Connor, your friend Chris is an idiot. Like, that is the worst idea I've ever heard. Like, inside you're bawling, crying, but you're getting this honest feedback. So at the start, when I started Bridge, I never told anyone. I only recently put on LinkedIn that I actually am the founder of Bridge. So I was using Bridge and coding up the first version of it and getting the really hacky MVP version of it out there. And I'd start seeing, would people start accepting the introductions and forwarding the introductions and giving feedback, and would they feel like there's a tool in here or something like that? And I didn't tell anyone I was meeting. They were like, what is this thing? And I'd see them signing up then, joining as well. So I was getting real feedback by not being a stealth startup, which I disagree with, by being an anonymous startup. It wasn't Connor's startup and Pete wasn't trying it because he's my buddy and blah, blah, blah. It was because it landed in your inbox. And I wanted to test virality. Because we didn't have virality figured out at DataHug, and we did loads of PR and you get massive spikes, and we did like VC funding now and you get massive spikes, did all churn. I was like, okay, this comes to the third point where people talk about building MVPs. The advice I give is there's a great blog post called Long Live the Rat, the MVP is dead. And RAT stands for Riskiest Assumption Test. So you meet these founders with these amazing visions. And I had that at DataHug, we could chat for hours, give me the whiteboard, I could just do a whole beautiful mind all over the place, and VCs, everyone would love it, we're all excited. And that really works for VCs. They want to see the 7-year vision. But then you got to build something tomorrow. And then so there's a 7-year vision, or as I think Des Traynor at Intercom talks about 666. So you have your 6-year kind of timeline for strategy, your vision, 6 months is your strategy, and 6 weeks is your tactics. So there's actually 3 different time horizons founders need to be able to jump between. So it's very good at the 6-year stuff, but it's like, what do I do in the next 6 weeks? And the risk assumption test is, okay, for all of this to happen, this amazing vision to happen, Pete needs to hit accept on that intro I offer him. So let's just get intros out to Pete and say, does he hit accept, fill out the information? Okay, that was assumption 1. So 80% of the time, Pete would do that. Okay, cool. My target was 50%. And then, okay, now I'm going to forward it to the next person. Will they accept it? And the target was 50%, and 90% of them accepted or declined it. And it's like, okay. So it's actually just what are the incremental steps in order that my whole life vision is based on. And if I can just go through these assumptions one by one in a very disciplined approach, that really helped me, and I apply that to Bridge every day. And I say that to founders when they're like really good at the vision. I'm like, okay, let's just focus on your riskiest assumptions, and let's figure out your roadmap for the next 6-12 weeks, particularly on something like Techstars. So, and then the final kind of high level one, and Jens actually has adapted his workshop to be around this as well, and I fully agree with it, is everyone talks about pivoting, but positioning is actually what needs to be done most of the time. You need to pivot your positioning, not your whole product and your code base. And it's actually just like, and that's what I think the value of Techstars was when we were doing the last part of Techstars. People talk about its presentation skills and demo day. It's actually more about strategically figuring out how to position this thing right and how to get into the market right. So for example, with Bridge, when I position it as intros, VCs hate it because they're like, it's niche, it's a little tactical thing, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, actually, that's the right thing for me to do as a company because I need to build up this little beachhead and grow from intros and get the connectors and grow out. And they don't like that incremental bottom up. They like this big vision of DataHug, and that's understandable. But the right thing for the company for me was positioning this as like just an intro tool. Because marketing is so hard to do, standing up in people's mind is so hard to do. It's like, well, what hashtag do you want to own? And it doesn't mean, with DataHug, I felt I was diluting my vision. Like, how dare we talk about something so narrow? We're creating this massive visionary thing. But actually, just owning the hashtag intros in people's mind is great. Like next, we want to own the hashtag fundraising, and the next hashtag we want to own is prospecting. So we're like, go from the connectors, go to then the founders who are fundraising, and then when people are selling, when they're thinking I need to get in the door, they're going to think of Bridge because they can search your networks and find ways into the door. So I almost see it as like, how can we position it better to have more, to have a better chance of getting those early power users and move on to the next group of power users and the next group of power users. So I see this as an incremental kind of thing. But it's often positioning and how to tell your story. And just, it's hard for me to do as a founder because I'm so close to Bridge. But the way hearing you describe Bridge is a way better. And that's what Techstars does really well with the mentors. You pitch them your thing and they tell you back what they think they heard. And that's almost helping you understand positioning. And you're like, yeah, it does do that. And they're like, well, just focus on that for maybe the first 6 months and not pivot and blah, blah, blah. And just be that boring, small niche feature to get enough momentum to get you closer to your vision. So this positioning thing is something I applied as well. And they're kind of the high level ones that I kind of hark on about over and over again, but I hear in my head the whole time. And every time I make a big mistake in Bridge, it's because I've done some premature scaling. I've heard someone that I loved and was excited about before we had that role ready, or we really needed that role. And that's probably, okay. I still make some of those mistakes, but I hear them in my head every time I make a decision, and I try and use that framework.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I really love the reference to positioning because I think that's the way to position things really with founders, is that when you say the word pivot, they think what you mean is that, okay, the product that you've built, you are completely selling it to the wrong market. You need to be pursuing this other market with that. And you need a whole new skin around this, perhaps a new UX. But the core of what you've built is something that's really useful. Like when Alan Meany, when he built Fundrex, that was just a messaging system behind the scenes. And that they said, listen, this isn't going to work for what it is. We need to find another use for it. But the tech that we've built is sound.
Yeah.
And when you talk to founders about pivoting, and when I talk to founders about, listen, 10 of the 12 companies that go through Metro Madness generally come out of it in the shape of, hey, we've more or less confirmed the direction you're going. Let's just go faster. 2 out of those 12 would be like, hey, actually, you know what? We're doing this all wrong.
Yeah.
We need a hard pivot. But like you said, much of the time it's about positioning. It's about you are just not presenting yourself in the right way. And I don't mean that from the perspective of being up on stage and pitching your business. It's about how you talk about the customer group that you're going after. What is your beachhead? How are you actually going to get into that beachhead? And just making that point to VCs that that's not the everything. us going after our first little wedge into the market is not our 5 to 10 year vision. That's just to get us going. And sometimes VCs look at the initial beachhead market like, I'm not interested in that market.
Exactly.
I'm not interested in that product. I'm not going to invest in that. It can be such a touchy subject. Just one other point, Connor, you have, by mentioning Des Traynor from Intercom in the last few minutes, have just underscored this whole ethos of this is a very small world, and the connections that we all have and these mental models that we all have and these things we're thinking about somehow do resonate across the airwaves, where your brain cells and my brain cells were somehow connected a few minutes ago, because I was listening to Des Traynor on Invest Like the Best this morning.
Oh, wow.
With Patrick O'Shaughnessy. And I brought a couple of his snippets to this conversation that I wanted to mention that I hadn't sent you when I sent you a few ideas to talk about this conversation or to think about this conversation. And one that you just mentioned was the premature scaling. But what Des was talking about was kind of the other end of that, which is having too long of a runway.
Yeah.
And that he was referencing a founder conversation where that founder said to them, listen, we've got our product to market, we've grown, we started to scale. We now, with the revenue tap turned on and the funding, we have 72 months of runway. And his advice to that founder is like, do you really want to spend 6 years of your life, or the best years of your life, really doing this to prove that you can actually grow this into a $100 million business? Or how about you actually go and invest more in the business and you shorten that runway and you actually really try to boom and scale this and take 6 to 12 months rather than 72 months to get this going? Do you ever see that when you're talking to founders?
I'm seeing that at the moment. I think there's a few founders who raised money in 2021, maybe into the early parts of 22, and you see their investor updates and like 48 months of runway, and I'm like, oh, I would kill for that, because I know what I want to build and all that kind of stuff for the 48 months. And it's like, here's a picture of us having lunch and blah, 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 and all that kind of stuff. And there's no sense of urgency there as well. So the founders, kudos. Like, if they when I meet founders, what I'm looking for is motivation. And if they're highly motivated and this is like the missionary style founder and this is what they really care about, I'd be less concerned over that. And I think it's a good problem to have, and I'm jealous of those founders who have it, but I don't see it too much. And it's obviously the system went a bit crazy and people were getting 15 million investments, pre-product market fit. I think pre-product market fit, having constraints drives innovation, and no better constraint than running out of cash.
Totally.
And having a short runway. And that really helps you prioritize and focus. And like, one of the hardest things in a startup is not ideas, it's what to work on next. And that really focuses the mind when you're running out of cash. And you see the innovation really spike up. You can see why fundraising rounds have traditionally been 18 months kind of in period. I do think there's an evolution of that with rolling rounds and stuff like that. And I think that's kind of something I've adopted with Bridge versus DataHug, which I think has been quite beneficial. But, time will tell on that. But ultimately, some people, I've seen another startup where they raised 100 million. I think their revenues were like 4 million, and something like 3 million of that was just interest. So like, they were actually kind of profitable based on interest and stuff like that. I'm like, well, okay, this is probably not what the system wanted to happen. But, again, I'd probably be on the side of pro founders, but I don't think it's good news for the investors. And I think to Des's point, founders need to figure out when to accelerate. And for me, that's really go slow until product market fit, not go like iterate fast, but keep the team small and lean on product market fit. And then there's scaling. So there's premature scaling and there's scaling. So like, if you hit a point of scaling, like go, you have it figured out and you have it locked in, and you need that cash, you need to go fast. Like, there's a company I invested in there, they grew MRR 99% last month, and we're like, holy crap. And like, the product market fit is really coming in, and we're like, holy crap, this could be a rocket internet style thing where it's a local geographic play. We're like, we might need we get this working in 2 more geographies, then the play is like, we need to raise money to do the exact same thing in 20 geographies at the exact same time and go absolutely crazy. But it depends on every company and every situation. But I think they kind of are dialing in product market fit, and the market's proving that, and their growth is proving that. And that's a point where you just want to go hell for leather. But they need to, the assumption is they only have it working in 2 small markets. If they can make it work in the 3rd market, then we probably have enough data points to show like, hey, it worked in 3 separate markets. Let's, the assumption is proven. And every time you prove an assumption, come back to the riskiest assumption test, you increase the value significantly. So on that point, will money help them prove their assumptions faster? And the sooner the startup that learns the fastest is ultimately the one that usually wins. And cash can make you too comfortable.
Totally.
So
totally. You've got to embrace the downside. The downside can feed you so much.
Not like being hungry, to drive creativity.
Oh yeah. Yeah, totally. This gets us to the point of our chat where I do like to ask the final question that my friend Owen Fitzgerald came up with when he was back doing this podcast with me. And we've asked it for everybody pretty much that's come onto the show. But what is one thing that people would not expect to know about you, Connor Murphy?
I think based on when I tell people how annoyed they get when I say this, I think this is the answer. Basically, I'm an introvert, and that usually surprises people, or they don't believe in that when I talk about networks and connections and all that kind of stuff. And I can explain why in a second, but I think curiosity is what makes me act like an extrovert. So I'm very curious. I love knowing how stuff works, how people work, why you did that, why you thought that, why you said that, why you asked that question. Like my teachers used to probably hate me, and kids who were usually in trouble were sent down, brought to the front of the class. I was usually sent down the back of the class so I could ask less questions. So I'd be up the front and I just hijack the class and I just ask 600 questions, and I just couldn't get enough of it.
I was put in the hallway.
Yeah, so I'd always be asking questions, and it's not in the definition of introversion. Why I say that introversion is, how you recharge your batteries. It's not how you act. So if you're tired and you're coming home, do you sit on the couch and not chat to anyone for 2 days on over the weekend? Or do you jump on the phone and ring your sister or your friend and you start chatting to them to re-energize? So I could go to something like Web Summit or anything like that, or any of these big networking events, and then just have an explosion of curiosity, an amazing 2-3 days. And then I would just sleep for a week, 2 weeks, and not talk to anyone. So that's really the one that surprises the most people. And then the second is I absolutely love product, but I never want to see your product when you're pitching me. I want to hear about you, about your motivation. Founders let me show you the product. I'm like, I don't want to see it. Don't show it to me. Because I believe if I understand your motivation and the market and everything else, I love product, that I think that's something we can always solve with enough time and money. But I know market is the bigger risk. And then the other big risk for me at early stage is the team. Because there is the analogy, someone said you're investing in the jockey, not the horse, because the horse doesn't even exist.
Yeah.
So for me, it's really, I want to understand this founder. And I don't want to just invest in that founder financially. I want to spend, 52 weeks, like that Techstars mentoring model, 52 weeks, half an hour a week, chatting to them on WhatsApp, async, helping out. And that really means, do I like them? Do I find them interesting? Do I think they're coachable? All that kind of stuff as well. But I love product, and that's where my strongest point is. But I don't want to see your product or talk about product until much later.
Yeah, no. And I do get that sense of you, and not terribly surprised to hear that you're an introvert, because I was imagining you were about to say something to the effect of, that you go to when you go to a big event, you do need a few days to recover from that because you recharge yourself. Yeah. I go to those events to recharge.
Yeah, so you're an extrovert.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I need that to fuel it. And I love, engaging with 25, 30 founders in one go. And that is my way of recharge. So that week 1 in Dublin coming up on March 11th, I'm very eagerly anticipating that, because I will be recharging by going that week and spending that with those founders.
I love Techstars, but I just found it so absolutely draining, because you're meeting, it's just so emotionally draining actually, because you build such great connections with people. You care so much about them and their success, and all the mentors, you want to make sure everyone has a great experience. And I like facilitating and hosting groups and bringing people together. I get such a buzz from that. Like you talk about the feedback at Bridge. I was just making coffee this morning. I got a pop-up. Someone just gave me feedback saying we had an awesome meeting. We're going to meet again. It just gave me so much joy to see these two people I know who are actually both Irish in Lisbon. They're going to hang out, and they had a good time meeting together. Just gives me great buzz, and that gives me a lot of joy. But I don't need to be in the room with them when that happens. Do you know what I mean? But that curiosity helps me probably connect better, because sometimes I can't even explain why I think two people should meet. I can't even remember why, but I get really strong feelings that Pete and Chris would really get on and should meet, which is a dopamine hit for me. And I think other connectors as well. They just get such identity from connecting. They get such joy from connecting. But it's not a recognized role, actually. There's not very few places where you paid to connect. And actually Techstars, when I joined, the first OKR was strengthen the power of the Techstars network. And I was bringing people together and connect people. I was like, wow. was the best job ever. I absolutely love working there. I love the organization. And I kind of joke now, for organizations who care about their community, who care about their networks, who care about bringing people together, I want to be your outsourced CTO. I want to give you the platform to do that better, to do that smarter, and to create more serendipity. Like, that's kind of my religion, that's my drug. And if I can foster that, or technology can help foster other people who do that, we want to help those connectors and those networkers and bring them together.
Connect the dots. Absolutely.
Yeah. I love that. ABCD. I'll be using that.
Always be connecting the dots.
Exactly.
Always be closing as well, right? Which is what we're doing right now.
Exactly.
So listen, Connor, it was fantastic talking through all of this, and it gave me probably another 10 reasons why I want to have another 10 conversations with you at some point in the future. We won't do them all this year, and perhaps not next year, but I'd say they're going to happen again relatively soon. So thank you so much.
Like money, networks never sleep. They just grow and compound in value. And, if you get your money into the right ISA or whatever else, it compounds. And for me, the most, I think, was it Warren Buffett or someone said, the most beautiful thing in the world is compound interest. I actually would argue the network and the compounding effects of your network. Think of those people you knew at 20 and look where they all are now and how successful they are and all the locations they're in, and think of their networks. And like on average, we see like in Bridge, everyone has about 4,000 unique connections, and you start bringing together 10, 20, 30 people that trust each other and sharing their networks. The compounding effects there are just phenomenal. And even just here, the conversation, both of us getting ideas from each other. This is how humans innovate. They come together, they bump into each other, they swap ideas. One idea triggers another idea. This is how we drive innovation as well. And it's super exciting, and I think it's the future of work, as we're going to be more remote, but we're going to have more time, thanks to AI, to focus on more innovation and more creativity and doing that with other people. Absolutely. So it's actually, the future is going to be more human in a way, is my view, in the whole AI kind of space.
Absolutely. Relationships make the world go round. I hear you.
They do. They make it fun too.
Thank you, Connor.
Great chatting, Pete.
That does it for this week, folks. Thanks to Connor Murphy for opening up his mind to help us figure out why he does what he does. You can learn more about Connor and Bridge on our website, moneyneversleeps.ie. We'll do a deeper dive into the output of this conversation in our Money Never Sleeps newsletter on Substack, so check that out on moneyneversleeps.substack.com and subscribe. If you like what you heard, please leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, as it helps others to find the show. Also, thanks to Conan Brophy from Create Sound for mixing and editing this episode. Conan is an excellent media man to get in touch with when you're thinking about launching your own podcast. As for me, I'm an early-stage startup investor focused on where fintech meets crypto and crypto meets Web3, and I lead the Techstars Web3 Accelerator. There are plenty of links in the show notes on moneyneversleeps.ie on how to get in touch, so don't hesitate to reach out. Finally, till next time, thanks for listening. See ya!
Money never sleeps, pal.